What's up, guys? Dope here. Someone had recently asked me how I got into the jobs that I did and how I've met some of the artists that I've met, and I said that I wanted to save that for its own video, and this would be that video. Real quick before I get into it, here are some of my most recent Halo 4 matches. I've been really enjoying this game a lot more than the previous Halo games, and I think it's because the multiplayer seems a little more fast-paced and COD-ish in some ways, which might also explain why I'm actually decent at them for once. Anyway, so how I got into all of my jobs, I guess it all started by being a loser in high school. I grew up in a really small, closed-minded town in Missouri, and back then, if you were a Marilyn Manson fan, that automatically made you a Satanist. So they were that small-minded. Keeping that in mind, I was also one of the very few Asian families in the town, so it's kind of a part of all kinds of minorities, and the world was kind of working against me, or at least I thought it was at that time. And I also didn't really have an interest in hanging out at keggers and getting busted for underage drinking and all of these other things that made you popular back then. So needless to say, nobody wanted to hang out with a social outcast weirdo. Instead, I spent a lot of my time learning about this whole new internet phenomenon and teaching myself code and Photoshop. And at the same time, e-teams for record labels started becoming a big thing, and who wouldn't want to help promote some of their favorite bands and being in touch with record labels? So I signed up for a few and started becoming a little more integrated in the music scene. And I remember one year I had received this demo tape. Yes, a cassette tape. That's how long ago this was. Anyway, I received this demo tape for a new metal band called Dope from New York City. And I liked what I heard, and I kept tabs on them. Then one summer, they were hitting the road with two other bands that I liked called Videodrone and Orgy, and I went to the St. Louis show. And I remember it being this really tiny venue, and I remember it getting so hot in there that I almost passed out. Security had to carry me out for fresh air at one point, and I remember their bassist at the time, AC, hadn't seen it all happen, and he was nice enough to come out and make sure that I was all right, and was super polite and brought me a cup of water, and we just kind of sat on the sidewalk and talked about anything and everything for a bit, and he introduced me to a couple of other guys that night. And then from there, I just kind of started going to all these dope shows all the time, and each one we'd end up hanging out more and more and more, and I'd help promote their shit, and eventually became like really good friends. And that's actually kind of how I got my nickname Sarah Dope. Was I don't remember who started it. Like it might have been AC, it might have been one of the other former band members. I don't really remember, but one of them had actually just started calling me that, and it just kind of stuck. And it like people were likely to remember that than my real last name. Like it was just easier and it rolls off the tongue. And to be honest, a lot of my really good friends to this day still don't know my real last name, and they've known me for like 10 years. And even my executives at my job now, like they don't call me by my real last name. They introduce me to like all of these big like music headwigs as, oh yeah, this is Sarah Dope. So yeah, anyway, through Dope, I met a lot of other bands through them, like whoever they toured with, and became friends with them, and it was just like this snowball effect. And 13 years later, and I'm still really good friends with a lot of them. Anyway, around 2001, 2002, I was one of the main Missouri reps for Immortal Records, and I remember hearing these early demos of a band called 30 Seconds to Mars, whose lead singer was the actor Jared Leto. And I remember, like Dope, I liked what I heard, so I kept close tabs on them. And then for their first ever US tour, I was there in a heartbeat, and I was there just for them. And I remember making my own 30 Seconds to Mars shirt, which, as some of you might have noticed, eventually started this huge trend amongst their fans. But back then, nobody really knew who they were, and I remember in St. Louis, I was the only one who went there solely for them. And my plan was to just check out the set and leave afterwards, but on my way out, I ran into their guitarist at the time, Kevin, and their bassist at the time, Matt, and they were super nice people, and they were really stoked to see that I was an actual fan, and I was like just there to see them. Like, I didn't really have any ulterior motives or anything. But we ended up hanging out and chatting for a bit, and I remember Kevin actually refused to let me leave because he was so relieved that I wasn't drilling him with all of these questions like, oh my god, you know, what's Jared Leto like, or whatever. And I was very clearly just there to enjoy their music. But he insisted on having me meet the rest of the guys and introduced me to everybody else, and we all just kind of hung out and talked, and long story short, we all became friends over the years, and I eventually did some official work for them from time to time. And then in 2004, I decided to pack my bags and move to LA just because I felt like I needed a bigger challenge, and I felt like I got everything that Missouri could possibly offer me. And I wasn't learning anything anymore, and everything just came to me too easily. So what better way than challenge yourself than move to a big city where everybody's in the music industry, and everybody's a photographer, and everybody's a designer. So yeah, I moved to LA, and by then I had already had plenty of friends in the industry, and I was ready to take it head on. And I remember starting off working as an intern at Warner Brother Records for the street marketing department, because that was also a big thing back then. And I remember taking a week off for vacation in New York City, and I came back to find out that we had a new head of street marketing, and all of these changes had been made while I was gone. And the new head of street marketing was this guy, Ro, who previously came from Roadrunner Records. And he had asked me what the company had me doing before I left, and I told him that they were just kind of having me help out putting together these packages to send out to our street teamers and making sure that our teamers are doing their jobs. And that they had started talking to me about doing a little bit of Photoshop work here and there. And so then he had told me, you know, when you have time, I want you to show me some of the stuff you've done, and we'll take it from there. And so one of the sites that I had listed was actually AC Slade's, who by then had left Dope for some other bands, which were signed on to Roadrunner Records. And the next thing I knew, Ro's eyes lit up, and he's just like, oh, wait a second, like, you're Sarah Dope? Like, I know exactly who you are. What are you doing making packages? You should be behind a computer. And I guess he had heard of me through the grapevine, which is kind of how the industry works. So anyway, he stuck me behind a computer, and together we kind of completely rebranded the department. And next thing I knew, I was designing flyers, posters, CD samplers, stickers, merch, and bunch of other materials for all of Warner Brothers roster. And at that time, it was, you know, all these huge artists like Madonna and My Chemical Romance and Green Day and Muse and all these really cool people. And you know, at some point I'd also spent time on Warped Tour to help out our booth and photograph our artists that were on it. And so, as you can imagine, I continued to kind of grow my network from there. And then I eventually left Warner to freelance for a really long time. I was doing all kinds of things, from web design to graphic design to modeling to photography to going on tour as a merch girl. As I've said before, I was kind of a jack of all trades back then. And I did some stuff for 30 Seconds to Mars because I'd already built that relationship with them from when I was living in Missouri. And at one point, I also took Five Finger Death Punch's first ever press photos and photos for their debut album, Wave the Fist, all because Zoltan and I had actually started talking on MySpace long before I moved to LA. Then when I had moved out here, we became actual friends and we're just hanging out all the time. Like, I remember when he was in some other band that I honestly hated, and I thought he was always better than that. And he had all these big ideas in his head, and you know, Death Punch wasn't even formed as an actual band yet. Like, there were all these instrumentals on his computer, and he was telling me who he ideally wanted in the band with him. And once everything came together, he had asked if I could take their photos, and I did it. And here's a secret, is I did it in exchange for sushi and seasoned fries, because I'm a food whore and I can almost always be bribed with sushi. But then of course he, he was a good friend and also gave me money even though I wasn't asking for it. Anyway, when I went on tour with Power Man 5000, I actually got that gig through this guy, Tommy Burke, who used to be like my tour dad on all of these old Dope and Slytherin tours back in the day. And he was friends with Power Man and knew that they were looking for a merch person at the time and called me up and got that all set up. And then when I went on tour with De'Aaron Gray, I actually got that gig from AC, and AC was friends with them and knew that they were looking for a temporary merch person to fill in while their regular merch guy took care of some other business. And at the time, I was hanging out in NYC at the time, and they were about to hit the city, so it just kind of made sense, and it would save them money anyway. They didn't have to fly anybody out. And to make things better, they were also touring with my friends in Believe the Dream, who I knew from hanging out in the whole LA scene. And then when I went on tour with Strata, I forgot how, but I had met them back then when I still lived in Missouri, and we just kind of kept in touch throughout the years. And then in 2007, they were looking for a merch person and were about to hit the road with Kill Hannah, who was another one of those bands that had kind of watched me grow up since I was 16. And so, of course, I took the gig, because why wouldn't you want to tour with your friends? And then I stayed with them throughout all these tours, with Chevelle, Sick Puppies, Finger 11, Inward Eye, and of course became friends with all those other bands through them. And then eventually I got burnt on touring, and I was back to other freelance gigs when my friend Beth called me one day. And the way Beth and I had met was when I was with Warner Brothers. We actually hired her to help run our booth on Warped Tour. But, by 2007, she was working for this digital company called Digicen, and they were looking to shoot a pilot for a client and needed someone to play this hot hacker chick. And she said that she immediately thought of me. And now I have no interest whatsoever in acting, never have. And I'm bad at it anyway. But there was money involved, and at that time, other business was kind of slow, so why not? So I went, and I eventually sat down with her boss, who had asked me what else I was doing and what else I could do. And so we had that whole discussion, and next thing I knew, I was working with them as a contractor, designing and photoshopping all of this stuff for all kinds of companies that they were working with. And then eventually we got bought by Disney, and eventually became Disney's social media house. So then I worked for the Mouse for about 3 years. Somewhere in that mix, we had started working more with Disney Interactive to help with some of their video game campaigns, and I came across Machinima. We set up a meeting with their president, Philip, and immediately hit it off. He put me in touch with all the appropriate teams that I needed for strategies and to deliver our Disney trailers to. And I remember he invited me to the first annual IGAs. And at that time, I had 2 friends looking for new jobs who were interested in getting into the video game world. My friend Alyssa and my friend Ricky. So I brought them along with me so they could network and try to get their own ways in there, and lo and behold, they eventually did. So time went on, and Philip had actually been aggressively trying to get me to move from Disney to Machinima for a full year before I said yes. It was just, anytime he would ask me, it was just never the right time for me, or it wasn't the right position. And then when I felt like it was time for me to move on from the Mouse onto other adventures, it happened to fall at the same time that Alyssa had been working at Machinima and forming their social media department, and she had finally gotten approval to hire someone else. So she hit me up and she said that she would rather have me first before asking anyone else, and so poof, I made the official move to Machinima as their social media community manager. And spoiler alert, most of those replies you got from Machinima's Facebook and Twitter properties last year came from a girl. Sorry to burst your bubble. Anyway, during that time, a couple of my old bosses from Disney had left to create a new company called theAudience. And around winter last year, I'd started to really miss working in other forms of entertainment. And eventually, my old bosses had hit me up informing me that they had just lifted their hiring freeze and really, really needed me to come work with them again, and I took the offer. So now here I am at the audience, and if you want to do a little reading on what we do, we actually just went public this weekend through the New York Times. So I'll put the link in the description if you're interested. And that's the majority of my story. There are, of course, a lot of other branches, but that's the gist of it. And I hope you enjoyed it. Later.